Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting Karen Page and Foggy Nelson for Marvel Zombies. As you can see, the very first thing I've done is sprayed them with some matte white spray from Colourforge. So Karen's got some black trousers and black boots, so I'm going to use a Baden Black to paint those. And then I'll give them both a wash with some Nuln Oil. Then for Foggy's suit, I'm going to use some Nurgling Green. And that will receive a wash of Athonian Camo shade. Once that wash is dried, I'm going to use Corvus Black to highlight Karen's trousers and a little bit of her boots. And to continue to highlight the boots, I'm going to use some Eshin Grey. For her t-shirt, or jumper, I'm not entirely sure what it is because she's wearing a cardigan, I'm going to use some Demonette Hide. And this will be highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Demonette Hide and Slaanesh Grey. And then Slaanesh Grey just by itself for the final highlight. For the rest of her outfit, I'll use Mephiston Red. And then to add some shade, I'm going to use some Carroburg Crimson. To highlight Foggy's suit, I'm going to dry brush the Nurgling Green. And this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Nurgling Green and Wraithbone. Then to paint his shirt, I'm going to use Wraithbone. Followed by a 50-50 mix of Wraithbone and Matte White. And then lastly, Matte White just by itself. He's wearing a waistcoat, and I'm going to paint that exactly the same as I painted Karen's jumper, starting with Demonette Hide. I'll then paint his tie with a little bit of Dryad Bark. And I'll paint his shoes, his belt, and his case with some Rhinox Hide. Then both the Dryad Bark and the Rhinox Hide will receive a wash with some Agrax Earthshade. To highlight Karen's jacket, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red and Evil Sunz Scarlet. This will be followed by Evil Sunz Scarlet just by itself. And then finally a 50-50 mix of Evil Sunz Scarlet and Wild Rider Red for the final highlight. Then I'm going to paint her belt with some Corvus Black. To highlight Foggy's tie, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Dryad Bark and Gothor Brown. And this will be followed by Gothor Brown just by itself. Then to highlight his shoes and his bag, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Doom Bull Brown. This will be followed by Doom Bull Brown just by itself. I'm then going to paint the folder in his arms with some Avalanche Sunset. And that'll be highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Avalanche Sunset and Dawn Yellow. For one of the books he's holding, I'm going to use some Thunderhawk Blue. And that'll be highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Thunderhawk Blue and Matte White. For the rest of the papers, I'm going to use some Corax White, followed by a matte white highlight. Then to paint Foggy's skin, I'm going to use some Bugman's Glow. And to paint Karen's, I'm going to use some Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm then going to use some Retributor Armor to paint Foggy's belt and the buttons on his jacket. Then the skin and the gold will receive a wash with some Reikland Flesh Shade. And while that wash dries, I'm going to use a little bit of Iron Hand Steel to paint the buckle on Karen's belt. And I'm also going to use it to paint the manhole cover on Foggy's base. Then both those sections will receive a wash with some Nuln Oil. Once the wash on the skin is dried, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone for the first highlight on Foggy. But before I go any further, I'm going to use some Abaddon Black to paint their eyes, followed by matte white, and then lastly Abaddon Black for the pupils. Then going back to the skin, I'm just going to simply use Cadian Flesh Tone to continue with Foggy. And then for both Karen and Foggy, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh. And then lastly, a quick highlight of Kislev Flesh just by itself. For both the hairs, I'm going to use some Xandri Dust. And I'll wash that with some Army Painter Soft Tone. I'll then paint Karen's base with some Dryad Bark, and Foggy's with some Dawnstone. I'll also use that Dawnstone to pick out a few of the stones on Karen's base. Next, I'll use a little bit of Avalanche Sunset to pick out the yellow lines on Foggy's base. And I'll dry brush both bases with some Rakarth Flesh. I'll paint the rims using some Abaddon Black. And then I'll wash the base with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. There we are, that's Foggy and Karen both finished. I have to say they're both really fun models to paint. Excellent for bystanders. They're also really useful for Marvel Crisis Protocol as well if you have that. And they're super fast to paint, only coming in around about 2.5 hours for the pair. If you follow this guide, I really do hope you found it useful, and if you want to see more, there's plenty more Marvel Zombies videos on the channel, as well as other games as well, including Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars Shatterpoint, and Warhammer 40,000, other such things like that as well. I guess all that's left to say is thank you again, and goodbye for now. Oh, don't forget to subscribe, and all that stuff.